Look at Paris from above. Do you notice anything different compared to other big cities? There are absolutely no skyscrapers. Most of the buildings are only about 5 or 6 floors high, and the only tall building you can see is literally the Eiffel Tower. But if you think twice about where these pictures were taken, you'll notice that they were shot exactly where I am right now, on top of the one skyscraper Paris actually has called Tour Montparnasse. It is the best place to get a nice view of the city, especially since you don't have to look at the building itself. And that's because this building is the most hated building in Paris. It has even been voted second ugliest building in the world. And to understand why Paris never built more skyscrapers after this one, I need to tell you the story behind this very controversial building. And I'm not exaggerating, Parisians really love hating on this tower. I personally love using it to mess with my boyfriend Bobby, who is American. I tell him we're gonna see the Eiffel Tower, but I always show him Tour Montparnasse instead, so now he also enjoys hating on it too. But it's not just a funny joke about an ugly building, it's about how one mistake changed Paris' skyline forever. So let's try to understand what happened and why they even built this skyscraper in the first place. So, after World War II, Paris, like a lot of European cities, was trying to modernize fast. A lot of the old buildings were seen as outdated and dangerous. Some were even blamed for being breeding ground for tuberculosis, so the government decided to tear down old buildings and build something more modern. In Montparnasse in particular, they planned to replace the old train station with a new one, making it a great opportunity to fully transform the neighborhood. And they had a project of building a big skyscraper, and this project was already controversial and took way longer than expected, but the French president at the time really pushed for it because he saw it as a symbol of the modernization of Paris. But let me tell you, that moment right there was a turning point that signed the death sentence of skyscrapers in Paris for years to come. But for now, we're in 1970 and no one knows about that, and the construction begins, and from what I understand, it is seen as something really impressive and cool. Also, from an engineering point of view, it was quite a feat because it was built right above the metro. So the tower was finally finished in 1973, and it ended up being 59 floors tall and 210 meters high, which is 689 feet high, which by the way is still smaller than the Eiffel Tower, which is 330 meters tall, which is around 1,083 feet, or around the same height as an 81-floor building. But by the time it was completed, Tour Montparnasse didn't feel as modern because the project took way longer than expected. Also, the crazy economic growth and optimism of the post-World War II era was kind of gone by then, or as architect Claude Parent said, the party was over. The momentum of the 1950s, exciting for everyone, was fading. And right away, people started hating on the tower. It was given its official nickname that still stands today and is La Verrue de Paris, which translates as the wart of Paris. And since then, we regularly see articles with titles like these. So yes, the general consensus seems to be that this skyscraper is ugly. But I'm gonna be a bit controversial here. I don't think that's the real reason why this tower is so hated and that it completely killed skyscrapers in Paris. I'll tell you my theory in a bit, but if you think about it, there are so many other skyscrapers that have the same gray boxy look. Like, I've seen so many of them when I was living in New York City, and I've not heard anyone complain about them. Also, when I went and visited the Tour Montparnasse, I actually didn't find it to be ugly at all. Just maybe in need of an outside renovation, which I've learned should happen pretty soon. The inside of the tower is well maintained though, and it looks pretty much like any building you'll find in New York City, except that you can actually go to the last floor for an incredible view over all of Paris, which is where I went to take all the shots you see in this video. And by the way, this is such an underrated thing to do in Paris. It's way cheaper than going on top of the Eiffel Tower, there are no lines, and the views are way better. And I booked my ticket for this activity with Klook. Klook is a long-term partner of the channel, and I've been using them for a while to book all my activities both in Paris and around the world. They're very easy to use and they always have great deals, so I really recommend you try them. You can use my code LucileYTKlook or click the link in the description description below for a discount. So the real issue with Tour Montparnasse, in my opinion, is that unlike in other cities like New York or Chicago that are full of skyscrapers, it really stands out in Paris because it's the only tall building in the skyline. And people were already talking about that back then, because this New York Times article from 1983 said, "The new skyscraper on Boulevard du Montparnasse is almost an accident, something that had strayed away from Chicago and come to rest on a Parisian street corner." And that's because Paris already has a very cohesive and uniform look, with wide avenues and a lot of smaller 6-floor high buildings that kind of all look the same, but make the city so beautiful and iconic in my opinion. And this is all thanks to this guy, so this is Haussmann, and he kind of was given full powers in 1853 to redesign Paris, so he tore down entire neighborhoods, thousands of buildings that were kind of cramped and already crumbling, and instead he built the elegant buildings we still have today. One of his main goals was achieving a uniform look for the city, so he set very strict rules for how these new buildings had to be designed. Also, unlike London or Berlin, Paris was not bombed a lot during World War II, so most of these beautiful old buildings are still standing today, and they actually make up around 60% of all buildings in Paris, which in my opinion is why a skyscraper stands so much against the very uniform Paris skyline. Also, it doesn't help that it's an office building and not an apartment building. There's not really a reason for people to go inside the Tour Montparnasse unless they work there. It's just something you can see from far away, and it's not really built for Parisians to enjoy. Also, it is not the first time people complain about a tall building in Paris. Like, did you know that people used to hate the Eiffel Tower, at least at first? When they started building it in the late 1800s, a lot of Parisians were angry. Some artist and writer even wrote a letter in a newspaper saying that it looked like a factory chimney and calling it a truly ugly monster. But when the Universal Exposition opened, so this is kind of the big fair the Eiffel Tower was built for, everything changed. Millions of people came to see the tower, and little by little people started to love it. And over time, the Eiffel Tower became the most famous symbol of Paris. So who knows, maybe one day people will find Tour Montparnasse romantic, and maybe we'll have couples proposing to each other there. Also, Tour Montparnasse was not supposed to be alone. There were supposed to be other tall buildings in the area, but all the hate around this project was a death sentence for skyscrapers in Paris. And buildings over 37 meters, which is around 121 feet, were banned in Paris shortly after Tour Montparnasse was open to the public. And just so we're clear, to count as a skyscraper, a building has to be over 150 meters tall, that's 492 feet or around 40 floors, so it's way higher than the Paris limit. And for 40 years, Tour Montparnasse was actually the highest skyscraper in all of France, and while the world was rushing to build taller and taller buildings, in Paris we had newspapers talking about the supposed trauma Tour Montparnasse inflicted on people, and even local election campaigns built around the idea of tearing the tower down. So it really seemed that France was not into skyscrapers at the time. But what's crazy to me is that while people were arguing about Tour Montparnasse in Paris, there was a business district full of skyscrapers rising just a few miles away. And to see what I mean, here I need you to look very closely at this shot I took of the Eiffel Tower while I was on Tour Montparnasse. What do you see here right behind the Eiffel Tower? Yes, there is a ton of skyscrapers and tall buildings. They're just outside of the city limits of Paris. So this is La Défense, it's Paris business district. It is in a nearby suburb and it is not officially part of Paris. So this is where all the corporate headquarters and all the big banks are based. And it was part of a similar modernization plan as Montparnasse, but here things moved much faster since the area there was mostly farmland and factories. So the developers didn't have to worry about people complaining that their plan was gonna ruin the skyline or replace a beloved part of the city. So they built a first high-rise building in 1964 there, then a second one in 1966, and then a bunch of other tall buildings popped up throughout the years, including Tour First in 2011, which finally replaced Tour Montparnasse as the tallest skyscraper in France. Personally, I feel that it was a great compromise to modernize the city without changing the iconic and classical skyline of Paris. In my opinion, this neighborhood is really well done, it's well thought out, there's a sense of harmony, and also it's perfectly located compared to the rest of Paris. I also like that it's perfectly aligned with the most famous avenue of Paris called Les Champs-Élysées, which is super satisfying in my opinion. So having all the skyscrapers in only one place kind of creates a big contrast, both visually of course, but also culturally. So most of Parisians, me included, consider it to be a bit of a soulless place because it's only for big companies. Like, it's the second business district in Europe after the city of London. There's only big chains, which if you've watched some of my other videos, it's just not really what Parisians like. On my side, I briefly worked in this building back when I was working in investment banking for Société Générale, which is one of the biggest banks of France. And while it did feel super modern, I didn't really like it for the exact reasons I just told you about. However, now that I don't have to work there anymore, I actually like La Défense. It's of course not made to be cozy and cute like my neighborhood, but it really works well as a business district. What I find amazing about this place is that unless you have to go there, you never have to see it or think about it. And this seems to be Paris's attitude with skyscrapers. They are fine as long as you don't see them too much. So in a way, Paris doesn't need to have skyscrapers in the city because they have all already been pushed outside of Paris. But all this doesn't mean that Paris has completely given up on skyscrapers. I'd even say that Paris has a kind of love-hate relationship with skyscrapers, which is mostly hate with a tiny bit of love sprinkled from time to time. Like, Paris is of course a historical city with so much culture and old buildings, but it's also a major business hub with a lot of big companies. So there's this constant balance between modernizing and protecting the old stuff. And in 2010, the pendulum swings towards modernization again, and the rules change to allow buildings up to 180 meters, which is 590 feet high, in some neighborhoods outside of the city center. And since then, we've seen a few more skyscrapers pop up in Paris, and by seen I mean you really have to look for them because they have not built them to stand out this time. So one I like is the new courthouse in Batignolles, which is my neighborhood. It was designed in 2018 by Renzo Piano. It's the same guy who did the Shard in London or the Whitney Museum in New York City. It's right on the border of Paris and I actually really like it. I feel it blends in quite well with the park nearby, and it only looks massive when you look at it from outside Paris. There's also the Tour du Haut, which are two towers that were completed in 2021. One of them is actually the third tallest building of Paris, so after the Eiffel Tower and then Tour Montparnasse. And I have to tell you that I actually had never noticed them before making this video, so it blends in much better than Tour Montparnasse. But unfortunately, not every project goes smoothly, and sometimes we repeat the exact errors from our past. And I have to tell you about Tour Triangle. It's this massive glass pyramid that's under construction in the south border of Paris, and let me tell you, it has been causing drama for years. People protested, there were lawsuits, delays that dragged on for years, and it finally got approved, but the backlash was so intense that it actually led to more restrictions on skyscrapers in Paris, which kind of reminds me of the whole story about Tour Montparnasse. So who knows, maybe the Tour Triangle could replace it as the most hated building in Paris. On my side, I have to admit that I've grown to like the Tour Montparnasse after making this video. I really love that people were so optimistic about modernity and the future at the time, and I don't know, I would like to believe in that a bit more. That's also where I'll leave you, so if you enjoyed this video, you should watch one of the ones that are on screen right now. I think you will like them too. I'll see you there.